Oh, darling, this night's mine, Bianca Lang breathed, her blonde curls bouncing as she spun on the Waldorf Astoria's marble staircase, crimson sequins igniting the Murano chandelier's glow. The Empire Ball for Black Excellence thrummed with New York's elite, tuxedoed titans, Veuve-sipping visionaries, all mesmerized by the 26-year-old influencer's sapphire parure, pilfered heirlooms that once sealed sacred vows. Julian Hale's arm encircled her waist, his billionaire smirk declaring conquest. Envy swirled like smoke from Harlem's hidden jazz dens. Yet from the velvet-draped balcony, Afiya Thompson materialized, an ebony inferno incarnate, her red-orange gown a molten cascade of crystal fire. Conversations fractured, breaths hitched, spotlights pivoted ruthlessly, crowning her poised silhouette. Bianca's comet trailed to embers. Afiya's aura devoured the dark, a sovereign's silent decree. What silences shatter empires? How does one woman's poise torch a thief's triumph? Dive in. This betrayal's blaze forges a legacy that devours the dawn. The chandeliers wept liquid gold over the Waldorf Astoria's grand ballroom, casting fractured halos on faces etched with ambition and old money. The Empire Ball for Black Excellence hummed like a live wire, New York's unassailable elite orbiting one another in a dance of veiled alliances. Laughter tinkled from crystal flutes, but beneath it lurked the sharp undercurrent of judgment, the kind that could elevate or eviscerate with a single sidelong glance. Afiya Thompson felt it all, a familiar prickle against her skin, as she paused at the top of the marble staircase, her hands steady on the banister carved like the ribs of some ancient leviathan. Her heart, though, that was a storm she kept leashed. Months of quiet unraveling had honed it to a blade. The late-night silences in their Harlem penthouse. Julian's cologne lingering on collars she shouldn't have checked. The way his eyes had begun to slide past her like she was yesterday's headline. Tonight, it could have broken her. Should have. But Afiya had learned long ago that power wasn't in the shatter. It was in the slow, deliberate mend. She inhaled the scent of orchids and aged bourbon, the air thick with jasmine from the bioluminescent installations she'd commissioned. Afro-futurist sculptures pulsing like heartbeats reclaimed from forgotten histories. This was her creation, this night, a beacon for Black storytellers. Directors who'd clawed through Hollywood's white-knuckled gates, philanthropists writing checks that funded scripts instead of silence. $8 million raised last year, lives ignited. And now Julian dared to parade his folly here, in her sanctum. She descended each step, a measured exhale, her red-orange gown whispering against the marble like flames licking silk. The fabric clung to her curves with defiant intimacy, a deep V plunging like a dare, the high slit parting to reveal the long, purposeful stride of a woman who owned her skin. Crystals embedded in the gradient shimmered, catching the light not to beg for it, but to command it, turning her silhouette into a living torch. Afiya's pulse thrummed in her throat, a war drum muffled by the cool press of her mother's pearl studs against her lobes, heirlooms from the Montgomery marches, talismans of endurance that grounded her against the vertigo of betrayal. She was no fragile ornament. She was the forge. The room noticed. How could it not? Conversations dipped, heads swiveled like compass needles to true north. "Afiya, darling," Lena Voss murmured first, the gallery titan's voice a velvet hook laced with genuine awe as she glided forward from a cluster of Basquiat collectors. Lena's eyes, sharp as a curator's scalpel, traced the gown's fiery descent. "This metamorphosis, it's pure alchemy. You've turned the Waldorf into Wakanda's throne room." Afiya's lips curved, not in the brittle smile of a hostess masking cracks, but in the warm bloom of authentic pride. Pride that bloomed from the marrow-deep satisfaction of seeing her vision breathe. The lantern-lit tables evoking ancestral festivals. The floor-to-ceiling windows framing Gotham's electric sprawl like a canvas she'd personally stretched. "Lena, you flatter the artist more than me," Afiya replied, her voice low and resonant, carrying the Brooklyn cadence she'd never fully shed. The unpolished edge that made her counsel in boardrooms unforgettable. "But thank you. This is for the sideline voices, the ones Hollywood whispers about but never amplifies. Jamal Reyes materialized next, his venture capitalist frame cutting through the crowd like a well-tailored promise. The man who'd bankrolled indie revolutions from Brooklyn lofts to Sundance screens gripped her elbow lightly, his grin wide and conspiratorial. Afiya Hale, you've outdone Versailles. And that's saying something from a guy who's crashed enough of them. His laugh rumbled, drawing nods from nearby philanthropists, their checks already itching in pockets. Afiya felt a flicker of warmth pierce the ice in her chest. These were her people, the network she'd woven thread by unyielding thread over a decade of shadowed labor. Jamal leaned in, voice dropping. That installation over there, the migration routes in LED, it's going to haunt every exec in this room. You've got us all rethinking our legacies tonight. She nodded, her dark eyes sweeping the space, cataloging the faces. Directors with fresh Oscars clutched like talismans. Young poets turned screenwriters buzzing with the electricity of possibility. This was vindication, small but searing, proof that her blueprints, dismissed as supportive input in Julian's war rooms, built worlds. But then, the air shifted, a ripple, subtle as a fault line cracking beneath marble. Heads turned toward the entrance, murmurs cresting like a wave against the shore. Afiya didn't need to look. She felt it in the way the room's gravity tilted, pulling eyes from her orbit. Julian Hale, her husband of 10 years, the man whose empire she'd midwifed from a scrappy Sundance pitch to a $2 billion behemoth, had arrived. Not alone. Flanking him was Bianca Lang, the lithe blonde who'd been haunting his calendar as creative consultant, her 500K Instagram followers, a currency Julian now mistook for depth. Bianca's crimson sequins caught the light like shattered rubies, but it was the necklace at her throat that clawed at Afiya's composure. The sapphire parure from their vow renewal in Senegal, a cascade of blues evoking her grandmother's unbreakable lineage, now draped like a conqueror's spoil across porcelain skin. The humiliation landed like a gut punch, hot and nauseating, twisting in Afiya's belly. Not the theft itself that she'd anticipated, piecing together Venmo trails and midnight texts like a prosecutor building a case. No, it was the audacity, the casual erasure. Julian's hand splayed possessively on Bianca's lower back, guiding her down the stairs as if this were a premiere, not a desecration. Whispers erupted, soft at first, then venomous. Is that, on Afiya's night, bold even for Hale? Afiya's fingers tightened around her champagne flute, the stem cool against her palm, a lifeline against the urge to shatter it. Rage bubbled, ancient and volcanic, born from generations of women who'd smiled through slights sharper than this. Her chest tightened, breath shallow as eyes flicked to her, pitying, probing, waiting for the crack. The scorned wife, unraveling in real time for tomorrow's page 6. She could taste the salt of unshed tears, the bitter ash of a decade's devotion reduced to this. A prop in his midlife rewrite. Julian caught her gaze across the room, his blue eyes, once soft with shared dreams under Martha's Vineyard magnolias, now gleaming with that predatory confidence, the kind that had ballooned HaleVision on her strategies alone. He inclined his head, a nod that screamed ownership. See? We're modern. Progressive. Bianca, oblivious or perhaps reveling, tossed her hair and laughed at something he murmured, the sound slicing through the din like cheap crystal. Afiya's vision blurred for a heartbeat, the ballroom's opulence warping into a funhouse mirror of her own making. This was her altar to black excellence, her blood and blueprints poured into every detail. The grants for queer youth scripts, the fellowships for diaspora directors. And he'd soiled it with his whim, his youth-chasing vanity. The pain clawed deeper, a vice around her ribs, squeezing until she thought her heart might bruise. 10 years. The pro bono nights redrafting his pitches, the boardroom battles where she'd whispered equity clauses that shielded creators from the very predators who'd once eyed her. The vow renewal where he'd knelt in Senegalese sand, sapphire in hand, promising, we claim it all, together. Lies, all of it, crumbling under the weight of his indifference. She wanted to scream, to rip the parure from Bianca's neck and hurl it into the Hudson, to make him feel the hollow ache of being invisible in your own life. But Afiya Thompson was no tempest to be unleashed for their spectacle. She was the eye, the calm that devoured storms. With deliberate grace, she lifted her glass, a subtle toast to the ether, not to them, and turned back to Jamal, her voice steady as bedrock. Legacies aren't built on spotlights, Jamal. They're forged in the work no one sees. He nodded, oblivious to the war raging beneath her skin, and she let the conversation flow, each word a shield, each smile a sword. The room watched, waiting for a fracture. But Afiya stood unbroken, her fire banked but blazing. Tonight she wouldn't shatter. Tonight she would eclipse. The orchestra swelled, strings vibrating like veins under pressure, and Afiya felt the first true spark of something fiercer than hurt. Resolve. Let them glitter. She would burn. As the orchestra's strings lingered like a half-forgotten promise, Afiya excused herself from Jamal's circle with a murmur about greeting the nonprofit leads, her smile a polished shield against the storm still churning in her veins. The ballroom's pulse thrummed on, jazz riffs weaving through the crowd like smoke from a hidden cigar. But her mind, that relentless architect, slipped backward, unbidden, to the foundations she'd laid. Foundations Julian now trod upon with the casual cruelty of a man who'd forgotten the blueprints were hers. She wove through the throng, the high slit of her gown parting like a secret shared only with the marble beneath her heels, each step echoing the rhythm of a life built in shadows. Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn. That was the forge, the unyielding cradle where Afiya Thompson had first learned to temper fire into steel. Born in a walk-up brownstone, where the L train rattled dreams awake at dawn, she'd watched her mother, Ilara, bend over a Singer's sewing machine until her fingers bled calluses into lace. Afiya Thompson, a woman whose laughter could chase rats from the walls, but whose eyes held the quiet defeat of too many no's from garment district bosses who saw only color, not craft. "We stitch what they overlook, baby," Ilara would say, her voice a husky melody over the whir of the pedal, threading Afiya's hair with bits of silk as she hemmed prom dresses for girls who'd never afford the real thing. Those nights with the scent of starch and street rain seeping through cracked windows, Afiya vowed silently. She would not mend others' scraps forever. She would design the damn garment. Columbia came on scholarships scraped from community college edges and a part-time gig clerking at a midtown law firm where she'd eavesdrop on partners dissecting contracts like cadavers. Law review wasn't a whim, it was warfare. Afiya dove into entertainment clauses, dissecting how studios devoured black narratives whole, swallowing talent, spitting out caricatures. Her professors noted her ferocity, the way her briefs cut through legalese like a switchblade through fog. Thompson doesn't argue cases, she unmakes them. But it was Sundance, that snow-choked January in Park City, where the blueprint ignited. The festival air bit like regret, streets slick with slush, and the desperate hope of indie dreamers. Afiya, 28 and armored in a wool coat bought secondhand from a village thrift, had slipped into a midnight screening of a rough cut about Bronx hustlers chasing hip-hop glory. The director, a lanky white guy named Julian Hale, all earnest eyes and rumpled flannel, his script raw with urban pulse but polished nowhere. He'd cornered her post-credits in the lobby, breath fogging the glass doors, his pitch tumbling out like an avalanche. "It's about the grind, you know, the stories they bury in the B-reel, but the execs, they laugh me off. Diversity quota, they say, like it's a checkbox." Afiya had sized him up, not with disdain, but with the keen eye of someone who'd seen 1,000 pitches die in boardrooms. He had vision, jagged and true, films that could crack Hollywood's alabaster facade, amplify the diaspora voices her mother's stories had whispered to her over thimbles and thread. But execution? He fumbled handshakes like a kid with butterfingers, his Rolodex thinner than the festival fog. "Show me the script," she'd said, not a question, and he'd handed it over with hands that trembled just enough to betray his hunger. 2 years blurred into a clandestine apprenticeship, Afiya negotiating pro bono from her Columbia Library corral, redlining contracts that shielded black creators from the predatory fine print. Clauses that locked residuals tighter than Fort Knox. Options that vanished talent into development hell. She pitched to execs who dismissed Julian as that diversity bait kid, her voice a silken blade. This isn't tokenism, it's disruption. Imagine the headlines. HaleVision greenlights the next moonlight, but with equity baked in from day one. Doors she'd kicked open with sheer will, introductions to financiers at Tribeca Mixers, revisions that turned his raw outrage into Oscar bait. When the debut film landed a $50 million distribution deal and a Best Picture nod, the credits blazed Julian's name in 72-point glory. Hers, a ghostly legal consultant, in the crawl, gone before the applause peaked. Afiya stood in the Dolby Theater shadows that night, heart swelling with a pride laced bitter as chicory. Proud of the film, yes, but pierced by the erasure, the way history elided the hands that held the hammer. The wedding followed like a fever dream, magnolias arching over a Martha's Vineyard cliff where the Atlantic crashed hymns against ancient rocks. Julian, transformed from scrappy dreamer to rising star, knelt in the sand with the sapphire parure cradled in his palms, blues deep as midnight rivers, sourced from a Senegalese artisan who'd etched resilience into every facet. All I conquer, he whispered, lips brushing her temple as salt wind tangled their vows. We claim together, forever woven, Afiya. You're the thread that holds it all. Her heart had cracked open then, a fissure flooded with light. Belief that this white boy from Connecticut's suburbs, with his earnest fumbling and fire for forgotten stories, saw her not as accessory, but architect. She said yes, not to the ring, but to the horizon they painted. Empires shared, shadows banished. Elara, tears carving tracks through her powder, had squeezed Afiya's hand. Stitch your own pattern, child. Don't let him hem you in. The Harlem penthouse became their canvas, a mid-century marvel Afiya curated with the precision of a general mapping battle lines. Soaring lofts flooded with light from Hudson-facing windows. Walls alive with murals by rising black artists she'd championed. Strokes of cobalt and ochre evoking jazz riffs and civil rights marches. The kitchen echoed with her grandmother's gumbo, thick with andouille, and okra simmered slow over gas flames she'd insisted on installing. No sterile induction for a woman raised on open pots. Libraries groaned under Baldwin's fire and Morrison's rivers, scripts stacked beside them like ammunition for the wars they'd waged together. Afiya chose it all. Sustainable teak from African imports for the floors, lighting that danced like ancestral fireflies, spaces that breathed possibility rather than pretense. Here, in the heart of Harlem's Renaissance, she'd believed they were building not just a home, but a legacy. HaleVision ballooning under her whispered strategies, greenlighting series on Lagos hustles and Bronx ballads, private jets to Cannes, where her charm unlocked funding for women of color directors. She helmed the Harlem Arts Collective's board, funneling $20 million into youth programs that turned street poets into screenwriters. Her endorsements launching careers like arrows loosed from a bow she'd strung herself. In those velvet rope realms, Tribeca premieres, Essence keynotes, she wasn't Julian's wife. She was Afiya Hale, the consigliere whose equity clauses became legend, the tastemaker who could make or maroon a project with a single nod. Pride had swelled in her then, a quiet thunder. This was reciprocity, the empire they'd vowed. But as Afiya paused now amid the ball's swirl, a flute of untouched champagne cooling her fingers, that pride twisted into something sharper, a thorn lodged deep. The murmurs around Julian and Bianca swelled, a tide pulling her back to the present, to the sapphire winking like a lie at Bianca's throat. Her chest ached with the weight of it. The years poured into his ascent, the nights she'd sidelined her own scripts for his, the belief that her melanin, her merit, her marriage made her indispensable. Indispensable? Julian's indifference mocked that now, his arm around Bianca, a declaration. Upgrade complete. The pain bloomed fresh, a bruise pulsing under her ribs, hot tears pricking but unshed. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Not here, not in the sanctum she'd sanctified. Instead, Afiya straightened, her resolve hardening like mortar setting in firelight. The orchestra struck up a sultry saxophone solo, and she glided toward the nonprofit director, voice steady as she asked about the latest incubator cohort. But inside, the storm whispered, "Remember who wove the thread, and who dares to unravel it." The night was young, and her fire, oh, it was only beginning to burn. Afiya's conversation with the nonprofit director flowed like a well-rehearsed soliloquy. Nods to the incubator's latest cohort, a queer black teen from the South Bronx who'd scripted a short on intersectional ghosts. But her mind was a riptide, pulling her under to the fissures she'd first glimpsed months ago. The ballroom's jazz softened to a saxophone lament, mirroring the ache she buried deeper with every polite laugh. Julian's laughter cut through it all from across the room. Too loud, too performative. Bianca's trill joining like a mocking echo. Afiya's fingers tightened on her glass again, the champagne untouched, its bubbles rising like accusations she couldn't drown. How had the crack started? Not with a thunderclap, but a slow seep, like rain through a poorly sealed window. Insidious, inevitable. It began with the Miami rap party 4 months back, the kind of industry bacchanal where deals dissolved into debauchery under neon palms. Afiya had begged off, citing a board meeting for the Harlem Arts Collective, but truth be told, exhaustion had rooted her to the penthouse couch, scripts splayed across her lap like fallen soldiers. Julian's flight had been delayed, always delayed now, and his texts came in sporadic bursts. "Networking gold here. Love you." Then silence, stretching into the small hours. When he stumbled through the door at 3 a.m., reeking of salt-rimmed margaritas and something floral she couldn't place, Afiya rose, her voice a gentle probe. "How'd it go? That financier from CAA. You were prepping the equity pitch all week." He waved her off, collapsing onto the leather sectional she'd sourced from a Harlem artisan, eyes glassy with triumph or tequila. "Af, it's handled. Trust me." The vibe was electric. No need to overthink. Overthink. The word landed like a slap muffled in velvet, her counsel reduced to fussing. She'd swallowed it then, curling into bed beside him, his snores a barrier against the gnawing doubt. But sleep evaded her, the Hudson's distant hum mocking her vigilance. Trust me. How many times had she built that trust, brick by unseen brick? The real fracture fractured wide a rainy April dawn. 3 months passed. The sky over Manhattan a bruised shroud dumping sheets that blurred the skyline into watercolor regret. Afiya had risen early as always. The penthouse kitchen her command center. A sunlit expanse of quartz counters and copper pots hanging like talismans, where she'd once hosted Angela Bassett for a 3-hour deep dive on protecting residuals for black leads. That morning, it was donor packets for the Empire Ball. Glossy folders stuffed with projections. 8 million projected this year, up from last, all funneled to underrepresented directors, scripting the unseen corners of the American dream. Her fingers flew over the printer, collating bios of young filmmakers from Oakland tenements to Atlanta trap houses, each story a spark she'd fanned into flame. Julian's tablet lay forgotten on the walnut console, screen flickering awake with a notification chime. Innocent, insistent, like a heartbeat skipping. Afiya paused, wiping ink-smudged hands on a dish towel embroidered by her mother. Curiosity a thief in the quiet. Just the flight update, she told herself, reaching for it to sync his return from London co-pros. But the preview bloomed unbidden. Last night was magic, craving round 3 in the suite. Miss your fire already. Heart slamming against her ribs like a caged bird, Afiya tapped it open, the world tilting on its axis. The sender, Bianca Lang, profile pic a sun-kissed selfie from some Hamptons yacht party, blonde waves artfully tousled, 500K followers trailing her like digital courtiers. Attached a photo. Julian, grinning wolfish in a suite overlooking the Eiffel Tower, his arm slung low around Bianca's waist, her barely there slip riding up as she leaned in, lips parted in that influencer pout. Effortless, eternal youth. The timestamp, 2 nights ago, when he'd texted Afiya a bland message that ran long. Home soon. Nausea roiled, hot and acidic, climbing her throat as the kitchen, the heart of their home, where gumbo had sealed partnerships and laughter had echoed off reclaimed brick. Suddenly reeked of deceit, the rain's metallic tang seeping through the window like betrayal's breath. Afiya's knees buckled, but she caught the counter, pearls digging into her palm like anchors. This wasn't abstract hurt, it was visceral, a blade twisting in the soft underbelly of everything she'd poured into him. 10 years of pro bono nights, of rewriting his pitches until they sang, of opening doors in rooms that slammed on her own ambitions. The sapphire parure, gifted in Senegalese sands with vows that now mocked her from afar. Her breath came ragged, vision blurring with tears that scalded. Tears for the girl from Bed-Stuy who'd stitched her future from scraps, only to watch it unravel in a stranger's arms. How long? Why her? The questions clawed, feral and unanswered, her reflection in the darkened window a ghost. Eyes wide with shock, lips parted on a silent scream. But Afiya didn't scream, didn't hurl the tablet or dial his number to unleash the fury boiling in her blood. Rage was a sparkler, bright, brief, blinding. Strategy was the inferno. She'd learned that in Columbia's cutthroat seminars, where hasty accusations folded like cheap suits, and patient prosecutors carved empires from evidence. Swallowing the sob lodged in her throat, she exhaled slowly, fingers trembling as she screenshotted the thread. Every emoji heart, every can't wait for Toronto, archiving it in an encrypted folder labeled Truth. The rain hammered on, indifferent, as she resumed collating packets, her movements mechanical, a robot in her own skin. But inside the wound festered, a raw throb that painted every memory suspect. The rap parties in Miami where he'd return with unfamiliar cologne, the location scouts that stretched weekends into voids, the board decisions bypassed with a casual, handled it, babe, no biggie. Over the following weeks, the unraveling became her ritual, a clandestine excavation under the guise of routine. Afiya's lawyer's mind dissected it all, Venmo trails snaking to Napa spas under pseudonyms that screamed alias, charges for two at silk-sheeted boutique hotels in the village. Script readings dissolved into digital dust, invites to brainstorm sessions with Bianca that morphed into late-night threads Afiya hacked from Julian's synced cloud. Words laced with innuendo that turned her stomach. Your ideas light me up. Let's explore that chemistry off-page. Toronto Film Fest mixer, 4 months prior. Pap shots of them colliding, Bianca tagged as creative spark, Julian billing her to agents Afiya had vetted herself. The sting deepened with each fragment. Not just stolen nights, but stolen narrative. Panels she'd once anchored, now skipped for scheduling conflicts, her seat filled by Bianca's glossy headshots. Afiya's chest constricted anew at the memory, alone in her home office amid kente-draped walls, tears finally spilling as she cross-referenced timelines. The exact date he'd phased her out, introducing Bianca as the fresh voice HaleVision needs. Fresh, as if Afiya's voice, honed in the fires of erasure, echoing generations of black women architects unseen, was stale. The pain wasn't linear. It looped, vicious and velvet, ambushing her in quiet moments. A client's grateful email crediting Julian's vision, the empty side of the bed growing colder, the mirror's reflection accusing her of blindness. You built this, it seemed to whisper, and he dismantles it for a whim. Doubt crept in, insidious as fog. Had she been too invisible, too supportive, her merit mutable in his eyes? But doubt fueled fury, and fury forged focus. Afiya amassed it all, affidavits of her uncredited labor, emails embedding her edits into his epics and intros that ignited his IPO like dry tinder. She became cartographer of her own erasure, mapping the affair's contours with the precision of a surgeon excising a tumor. Each discovery carved deeper, yes, the humiliation of Bianca's Instagram glow-ups, Julian's likes like digital caresses, but it also cauterized, hardening her resolve into something unbreakable. He thinks me scenery, she'd think, staring at the Hudson's churning gray from her window, rain mirroring the storm within. But scenery doesn't design the stage. By the time the donor packets were sealed, Afiya's hands no longer shook. The kitchen, once a tomb of revelation, reclaimed its warmth as she brewed turmeric latte from the Brooklyn co-op she'd backed, sipping it slow, the golden heat a balm against the chill. Julian's flight home loomed, but she felt the shift, from shattered to sharpening. The Empire Ball wasn't just an event, it was her reckoning, a stage where she'd stand not as wife, but as sovereign. The rain eased to a drizzle, and Afiya smiled into her mug. Small, sharp, the first true ember of the blaze to come. Let him arrive with his secrets. She'd greet him with grace and goodbye. Afiya set the mug down with a soft clink that echoed too loudly in the empty kitchen, the steam curling like ghosts from a life she could no longer haunt. The rain had slackened to a persistent patter, drumming against the penthouse windows like fingers tapping an impatient code. Wake up. Wake up. But sleep was a luxury she'd forfeited the moment that notification bloomed. Instead, she moved to the island counter, pulling her laptop from its leather sleeve, the screen's glow casting her face in stark relief. Eyes shadowed with the raw edge of shock, lips pressed thin against the tremor threatening to betray her. Her fingers hovered over the keys, heart a frantic percussion in her chest. Each beat a question she dared not voice aloud. How deep does this go? How many of us were ever real? The first audit was clinical, a lawyer's reflex to dissect rather than dissolve. Afiya logged into the shared cloud account. Trust me, his words from Miami mocking her as the folders unfurled. Travel receipts first, a cluster of charges from 4 months back, the Toronto Film Fest mixer where HaleVision had networked with indie scouts. Julian's official itinerary showed panels on diaspora narratives, but the Venmo trail told a different gospel. $450 to a rooftop bar under Bianca Lang's handle, earn Bianca glow up, followed by $320 at a Soho boutique hotel billed to his Amex as location scout consult. Afiya's breath hitched, a sharp intake that tasted of copper, as she clicked through the influencer's public grid. Sun-drenched selfies from that very weekend. Julian cropped out, but his shadow unmistakable in the frame. Her caption a siren call. Sparks fly when vision meets vibe. Creative chemistry. The nausea surged again, bile rising as she imagined it. Their collision amid the fest's chaos, his earnest pitch dissolving into her practiced flirtation. The way he'd likely leaned in, hungry for the validation her depth could no longer provide. Tears welled then, hot and unbidden, spilling over as she scrolled deeper. Tinny laughter from a saved voice note, Bianca's voice breathy and teasing. Julian, your ideas, they're electric. Let's keep brainstorming after hours. His reply, overlapping. You get it. Afiya's great, but she's all strategy, no spark. The words landed like fists, each one bruising a different chamber of her heart. The strategy she'd bled for in those Columbia nights, the spark she'd kindled in Sundance snow, now dismissed as drudgery. Afiya's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a sob that wrenched from her core, raw and ragged. No spark? The accusation echoed in the space, amplifying the isolation. The kitchen vast and vacant, its copper pots silent witnesses to meals shared in feigned harmony. She slumped against the counter, pearls biting into her skin, the pain a grounding sting amid the emotional maelstrom. 10 years in this, reduced to great but, a footnote in his ego's expansion. The hurt wasn't just betrayal, it was diminishment, her ebony fire recast as mere fuel for his white-hot ascent, her melanin a marginal note in the ledger of his success. But grief's tide receded as fury crested, a slow boil that straightened her spine. Afiya wiped her face with the heel of her hand, resolve crystallizing like frost on the rain-streaked glass. No, she thought, voice internal but ironclad. You don't get to rewrite me. She dove back in, methodically now, her lawyer's precision a armor against the ache. Paparazzi shots from Variety's digital archives, Julian and Bianca at a Tribeca after-party, her arm looped through his, tagged as HaleVision's dynamic duo brainstorming the next big pitch. Dynamic. The word twisted like a knife, evoking the panels Afiya had once commanded. Introducing financiers to Julian's vision, her charisma the glue that sealed deals. Now those same agents emailed her with polite deflections. Excited for the collab with Ms. Lang. Fresh energy. Fresh. As if her energy, forged in Bed-Stuy's unyielding forge in Columbia's crucibles, had expired like yesterday's latte. The Toronto mixer photos sealed it. Bianca in a slip dress that screamed calculated allure, Julian's hand on her elbow as they collaborated over craft cocktails. The crowd's blur hiding nothing from Afiya's magnifying gaze. Script readings turned trysts. Drafts emailed to Bianca's address, annotated with her emojis and his brilliant insight. Let's discuss over dinner. Afiya's chest heaved with the weight of it, each revelation a fresh laceration. The late nights he'd claimed for edits, the skipped essence keynotes where she stood alone, fielding questions about his evolving team, evolving away from her. The isolation clawed deeper, a vice around her lungs, nights staring at the ceiling while he slept, the bed a chasm widening with every sigh. Was it always this? Doubt gnawed, insidious, whispering that her support had blinded her love a scaffold for his climb. Tears tracked silent paths down her cheeks again, but she dashed them away, fingers flying to compile a timeline. Dates cross-referenced with his calendar lies, Venmo pings plotted like pins on a betrayal map. Napa spa weekends disguised as retreats, Manhattan beach dinners logged as investor meets. The evidence mounted, a damning dossier that turned her pain into power, each file a brick in the wall she'd built against him. By midnight, the rain a steady dirge, Afiya closed the laptop with a finality that steadied her shaking hands. The kitchen clock ticked mockingly, Julian's flight landing in 2 hours, and she rose, pouring herself a finger of bourbon from the decanter he'd gifted her on their 5th anniversary. The burn a welcome scourge down her throat. It warmed the hollows grief had carved, stoking the ember of something fiercer. Not vengeance, but reclamation. He phases me out, she mused, gazing at the Hudson's inky churn, lights fracturing like her illusions. Fine, I'll eclipse his phase entirely. The Empire Ball loomed, her magnum opus, and with it, the stage for her silent indictment. No scenes, no scandals, just the unyielding truth of her presence. A queen who needed no crown to rule. The bourbon's heat spread, thawing the ice in her veins, and Afiya allowed herself a small, savage smile. Let him land with his secrets clutched like contraband. She'd greet him at dawn, composed as ever, the storm in her eyes veiled by lashes. But inside, the forge roared. Your move, Julian. Mine's checkmate. The first light of false dawn crept over the skyline as his key turned in the lock. But Afiya was already in bed, feigning sleep, her heart a fortress now breached, but unbowed. The game had changed, and she was no longer playing to draw. The bourbon's amber haze lingered on Afiya's tongue like a forbidden sacrament, its warmth seeping into the hollows of her resolve as she slipped back into the penthouse's shadowed hallway. Dawn's first gray fingers clawed at the windows, but sleep remained a traitor's lure. She'd feign it when Julian's key scraped the lock, her body a coiled spring beneath the silk sheets, breathing even as her mind mapped the minefield ahead. The dossier burned in her laptop's drive, a digital arsenal sheathed for now, but the real battle loomed not in courtrooms or clouds, but in the sunlit breakfast nook she designed herself. Quartz island veined like marble rivers, stools hand-carved by a Bed-Stuy artisan, whose work she championed at a forgotten gallery opening. There, over avocado toast and turmeric lattes, empires had been plotted in whispers. Now it would witness their unmaking. Julian arrived with the sun's reluctant rise, his suitcase wheels whispering accusations across the foyer tile. Afiya heard the thud of it abandoned, the rustle of his jacket shed like a skin too tight for his expanding ego. She stirred in bed, timing it perfectly, eyes fluttering open as he padded into the bedroom, his frame filling the doorway like a specter from a dream turned sour. Morning, beautiful, he murmured, voice rough with jet lag and something sharper. Leaning down to brush lips against her forehead, a gesture wrote as a contract clause, devoid of the heat it once held. Afiya arched into it, her hand trailing his arm in feigned affection, nails grazing just enough to draw a contented hum from him. Fool, she thought, the word a spike in her chest. You land with lies still warm on your tongue. But aloud she purred, rough flight. You look like you wrestled the Atlantic. He chuckled, collapsing beside her, the mattress dipping under his weight. A reminder of nights when that dip had pulled her closer, bodies entwining like vines claiming a trellis. Now it felt like quicksand. London was a grind, but worth it. Nailed the co-pro with that BBC exec. HaleVision's global now, Af. Real global. Pride puffed his chest, but Afiya caught the evasion, the way his eyes skittered to his phone on the nightstand, thumb twitching toward it like a junkie to a vein. She rose, silk robe whispering over her skin, and padded to the kitchen, calling over her shoulder with the lightness of a woman unfractured. Coffee, or shall I whip up that toast you pretend not to crave? Her voice, that Brooklyn-honed velvet, masked the tremor in her core, the seismic aftershock of last night's revelations, each Venmo ping a fault line widening. By the time he joined her at the island, the nook bathed in the soft spill of morning light through Hudson-facing panes, Afiya had plated the toast. Avocado fanned like green flames on sourdough she'd sourced from a Harlem bakery, drizzled with chili oil for that kick he always claimed woke him up. She slid his across the quartz, their fingers brushing, a spark that once ignited, now just static. Julian dug in with gusto, scrolling variety alerts, oblivious to the way her gaze traced the lines of his face, the jaw she'd once cupped in Senegalese moonlight, now slack with self-satisfaction. Ball's gonna be killer this year, he said between bites, not looking up. I've got a fresh face joining. Bianca Lang, you know, the influencer with the promo chops? She's brainstorming angles for our social push. Press will eat it up. It's synergy, Af. Pure synergy. The word hung in the air like smoke from a snuffed candle. Synergy. Their old battle cry, uttered in those early Sundance days when she'd synced his vision to her strategy, turning what if into wire transfers. Now it curdled in her mouth, bitter as the betrayal she'd cataloged till dawn. Afiya's fork paused midair, the avocado's creamy bite forgotten, her pulse a thunder in her ears. Bianca. Here, at the Empire Ball. The event she'd birthed from a modest Harlem mixer into Manhattan's must-attend summit, raising $8 million last year for directors who'd scripted their survival from the margins, queer poets from the Bronx, matriarchs mapping migration in celluloid dreams. Her altar to black excellence, every lantern-lit table, an Afro-futurist installation, a testament to the unseen labor she'd poured in. Grant proposals drafted in stolen hours. Donor dinners charmed with stories from her mother's sewing circle. And now Julian planned to promenade his paramour across it. Sapphire parure winking like a taunt at her throat, as if Afiya's legacy were a backdrop for his downgrade parade. Ice flooded her veins, a glacial lock snapping shut around her heart, freezing the scream rising in her throat. Outwardly, she nodded, slow and serene, forking a piece of toast with the precision of a surgeon incising a vein. Synergy, she echoed, voice smooth as the chili oils burn. Sounds strategic. The press does love a good narrative. But inside, the world fractured anew. 10 years of her scaffolding his ascent, from pro bono pitches to IPO intros, reduced to this casual erasure. My forum, her mind howled, my forebears' finery on her porcelain neck, while I stand as scenery in my own sanctum. The pain was exquisite, a vice twisting her ribs until breath came shallow, tears pricking hot behind her eyes. She saw it vividly, Bianca's sequins catching the chandelier's fire, Julian's hand on her waist guiding her through the crowd Afiya had curated, whispers turning not to awe, but to pity for the wife's sideline. Humiliation, public and profane, a violation deeper than any bedsheet betrayal. Her melanin, her merit, her marriage mocked in the very space where she demanded sovereignty for stories like hers. Julian glanced up then, fork midway, his brow furrowing just enough to feign concern. You good with it? Thought it'd boost visibility. HaleVision's brand, the collective's reach. Visibility, the irony clawed at her, laughter bubbling hysterically in her chest, but she swallowed it, nodding again with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Of course, whatever elevates the cause. Elevates, she echoed internally, the word a bitter sacrament. Elevates him, you mean? Your midlife pivot draped in my diadem, parading youth as if my fires flickered out. The ache deepened, a bone-deep throb for the girl who'd stitched dreams from Alara's scraps, who'd believed Julian's vows wove her into his warp, not as thread to be snipped. 10 years lost not to time, but to his carelessness, his conquest of convenience. Rage simmered beneath the ice, a magma threatening to crack her facade. But Afiya held it, fingers white-knuckled on her mug, the turmeric's gold mocking the storm within. He returned to his phone, satisfied, oblivious to the glacial resolve icing her core. Not oversight, she realized then. The truth a blade sliding home. Obliteration. He wasn't just bringing Bianca, he was replacing Afiya in the narrative she'd scripted. The tastemaker, the consigliere, erasing her from the elite circles she'd mapped like a cartographer, charting unclaimed lands. The ball, her brainchild, would become his stage. Photographers flashing at their dynamic duo, donors murmuring about the evolving Hale power couple, while she faded to footnote. The thought clawed, visceral and vile, her stomach churning with the urge to upend the island, to shatter the plates and scream, "This is my empire, you thief of threads." But no, screams fed spectacles, and spectacles fed him. Afiya was no footnote to be pitied. She was the fine print that felled giants. As Julian rinsed his plate, humming some pop hook Bianca likely curated for her feeds, Afiya slipped away to the master suite, the door clicking shut like a gavel's fall. The space, once their sanctuary, king-size bed draped in kente from a Brooklyn weaver, walls whispering of Senegalese sunsets, now felt like a crypt. She crossed to the full-length mirror, shedding the robe to stand bare before it, her reflection a map of battles won, curves earned in yoga flows that cleared her mind for midnight strategies, skin glowing with she oils her mother swore by, eyes dark pools of unyielding depth. 15 seconds, she gave herself, the clock ticking in her head. The time it would take a lesser woman to crumble, to call the collective chair and feign flu, to let the snubs swallow her whole. 15 seconds of raw, ripping grief. Sobs silent and savage. Fists clenched against the glass. Tears carving hot paths down cheeks flushed with fury. 10 years. Gone, not in a blaze, but a whimper of indifference. You built us, she wept to the woman staring back, and he unbuilds you for a flicker. Then the pivot. Breath drawn deep, shoulders squared like a general donning armor. Afiya turned to the closet, fingers trailing racks of couture she'd selected not for show, but for statement, pieces that moved like allies, not adornments. She withdrew the gown. Red-orange gradient, a phoenix's plumage in silk and crystal, form-fitting to celebrate the body that had carried her through Columbia crucibles and can conquests. Deep V daring the eye to her collarbone's graceful hollow, high slit parting for strides that claimed space. Low back, a bare expanse of vulnerability turned weapon. Crystals winked like embers banked for blaze, the fabric draping her sensual power without apology. No baubles from Julian's vault, only her mother's pearl studs, cool pearls born of Montgomery's marches, symbols of women who'd marched through fire unadorned. She slipped into it, the material kissing her skin like a lover's promise renewed, zipping it with hands steady now. The mirror reflecting not victim, but vanguard. Makeup next, warm earth tones to ground her glow, lips a bold crimson slash that echoed the gown's fire. Fierce, flawless, the polish of a woman who polished her own edges. Her hair, long and straight, fell in a sleek sleigh down her back, a curtain of midnight that framed her face like a crown's mantle. Afiya stepped back, appraising the whole. Not provocative, but potent, a silhouette that whispered sovereignty to every room it entered. The pain lingered, a dull throb in her chest, the grief for the decade's dreams deferred twisting like a thorn. But she met her eyes in the glass, whispering to the woman who'd stitched empires from silence. Your indelible mark. Tonight, you etch it eternal. Grace, not grenades. Poise, not pandemonium. Let them parade their fool's gold. She'd reclaim the room with the quiet thunder of her existence. The clock struck noon as she emerged, gown rustling like flames fed fresh air, Julian glancing up from his laptop with a double take, appreciation flickering, then dimming to habit. Stunning as always, he said, pecking her cheek before retreating to his study. Afiya watched him go, the doors click a starting gun. Weeks to orchestrate dominion, calls to the designer for final fittings, whispers to Alara Kingston about auction bids, mental rehearsals of speeches that would slice without spilling blood. The Empire Ball wasn't survival, it was sovereignty, and in its gilded halls, Julian's indifference would meet its mirror, her unyielding light. The limo idled like a black panther at the penthouse curb, its Maybach sheen swallowing the late afternoon light as Afiya slid inside. The leather cool against her bare back, where the gown's plunge dared the world to look away. The doors sealed with a hydraulic sigh, shutting out Harlem's hum, the distant wail of sirens, the bass thump from a stoop party 2 blocks over, and cocooning her in velvet quiet. She exhaled, long and measured, the city's pulse fading to a murmur through tinted glass. The driver, a stoic veteran of New York's nocturnal wars named Marcus, met her eyes in the rear view. Waldorf, ma'am? Straight shot? Afiya nodded, her reflection in the window a fleeting ghost, eyes lined in coal-sharp precision, lips a crimson vow. Yes, and take the bridge. Let me see the skyline first. He pulled away smooth as a promise, and as the Hudson blurred into indigo, Afiya's hand drifted to the pearls at her throat, their luster a talisman against the tremor in her chest. This is it, she thought, the words a mantra etched in fire. Not defense. Dominion. The drive was a descent into memory's undercurrent, the skyline's jagged teeth rising like accusations she couldn't outrun. Weeks had blurred since that breakfast nook ambush, Julian's synergy declaration hanging between them like a guillotine blade, her nod a mask for the cataclysm within. She'd orchestrated in silence, fittings with the Brooklyn designer who'd woven kente threads into the gown's hem as a hidden sigil of Ashanti resilience. Whispers to Alara Kingston about strategic bids at the auction, rehearsals of her speech in the penthouse mirror until the words flowed like blood from a fresh wound. No confrontations, no tears spilled in his presence, only the glacial poise of a woman who'd learned that fury unseen was fury unchained. Julian had noticed the chill, of course. A hesitant, "You seem distant, everything okay?" Over hurried dinners, his eyes searching hers with the half-hearted guilt of a man who'd already cashed his escape. She'd met them with smiles, deflections about collective deadlines, all while her heart hemorrhaged in private. The raw, ripping grief of loving a phantom, the betrayal's barbs hooking deeper with every "I love you" that rang hollow. Distant? She'd see thee inwardly, alone with the Hudson's roar. You made me a stranger in my own skin, but distance bred clarity, and clarity forged her armor. The dossier expanded, timestamps sinking his alibis to Bianca's feeds, her resolve a blade honed nightly on the whetstone of what-ifs. What if I crumble? No. What if I rise? The Waldorf loomed as they crossed into Midtown, its gilded facade a sentinel against the twilight bruise. Paparazzi flares already igniting the red carpet like distant gunfire. Afiya's pulse quickened, a wild staccato against her ribs, the car's hum amplifying the storm in her veins, fear laced with fire, the intoxicating vertigo of stepping into the arena she'd built. Marcus eased to the valet stand, the door opening to a wall of flashes and shouts, "Afiya! This way! Over here!" She alighted with the unhurried grace of a queen surveying her domain, the gown's slit parting to reveal a calf toned by runs along the reservoir, crystals catching the dusk in prismatic defiance. Poses came instinctual, profile to the left, chin lifted just so, smile warm but untouchable, the kind that graced essence covers without inviting touch. The photographers swarmed, lenses hungry. "Afiya, Hale! Who's the mystery date tonight?" Laughter bubbled genuinely from her throat, light as champagne mist. Myself, darling, always the best company. Clicks exploded, and she glided past. The carpet's plush yield under her heels, a red vein pulsing toward the ballroom doors. Inside, the air shifted, thicker, scented with orchids and ambition. The bioluminescent installations she'd curated, pulsing like captured auroras along the walls. Afrofuturist visions of circuits woven with ancestral beads. The grand hall unfolded like a dream reclaimed. Tables aglow under lanterns, echoing lantern festivals from New Orleans, second lines to Gullah Geechee shores, floor-to-ceiling windows framing Gotham's electric sprawl as if the city bowed in reverence. 400 souls orbited the space, directors shattering ceilings with scripts born in Brooklyn basements, philanthropists penning checks with the stroke of a pen that funded fellowships for the unseen. Afiya moved through them like a current, her presence drawing satellites. A young screenwriter from Oakland clutching a grant packet, eyes wide with the awe of possibility. Ms. Hale, that incubator, it's why I'm here. My short on queer ghosts in the projects? It's alive because of you. Afiya's hand found his shoulder, the touch electric with shared fire, her heart swelling against the ache. A momentary balm, the raw joy of impact untainted by Julian's shadow. It's yours now, she murmured, voice thick with the unshed weight of what this night meant. Claim it. Rewrite the ghosts. He beamed, and she pressed on, weaving toward the nonprofit director, a fierce matriarch from Chicago's South Side, whose program nurtured queer black youth scripts like seedlings in cracked concrete. Their talk flowed deep, incubators birthing stories of love unspoken in trap houses, funding gaps Afiya vowed to bridge with this year's haul, but the air thickened midway, a collective inhale rippling through the crowd like wind through tall grass. Murmurs crested, heads pivoting toward the balcony overlook, and Afiya felt it before she saw. The gravity's tilt, the room's oxygen thinning. She finished her sentence with the director. We'll double the cohort slots. These voices demand space. Touching her arm in genuine solidarity, then allowed herself the turn. There, framed against the gilded balustrade like a Renaissance betrayal, stood Julian. Armani tux sharp as his alibis, aura radiating that untouchable alpha sheen. The billionaire mogul who'd once knelt in Senegalese sands. Flanking him, Bianca Lang, a comet in crimson sequins, her lithe frame arched into his side, blonde waves tumbling like a cascade of misplaced sunlight. But it was the sapphire parure at her décolletage that eviscerated, cascades of blue fire winking like a profane sacrament, heirlooms from vows renewed under baobab branches, now a prop in her porcelain theater. Julian's palm branded her lower back, guiding her descent with possessive ease. Optics screaming upgrade, the ebony empress eclipsed by novelty's gleam. The room hushed in that exquisite way of high society's schadenfreude, eyes darting to Afiya like spotlights on a stage rigged for tragedy. Whispers slithered. That's the necklace, Afiya's renewal gift. Bold, Hale, too bold. Watch her crack, TMZ's gold. Afiya's breath caught, a vice clamping her lungs, the humiliation crashing like a wave over rocks. Public, profane, a desecration of her sanctum. Pain lands sharp, tears stinging as the crowd's gaze bored in, waiting for the trope. Scorned wife unraveling, tears for their tabloid feast. Her chest heaved, the gown's fabric a cage against the sob clawing up her throat. 10 years, my legacy, paraded like a trophy in your downgrade. Julian's eyes met hers across the divide, a flicker of something. Triumph? Pity? Before he inclined his head, that casual nod screaming, modern, right? Progressive? Bianca laughed then, tinkling and forced, tossing her hair as his murmur drew her closer, the sound slicing Afiya like cheap glass. The agony crested, a tidal roar threatening to drown her. Grief for the man who'd vowed forever woven, fury for the erasure of her thread, isolation sharp as the pearls digging into her skin. She could flee, feign a migraine, let the snubs swallow her whole. 15 seconds ticked in her mind, the world narrowing to the sapphire's mocking glint. But Afiya exhaled, slow and sovereign, the breath a bridge from break to blaze. No fracture for their feast. Instead she beamed, not brittle, but boundless, a warmth that bloomed from the marrow of her unbowed core. Lifting her glass in a subtle chalice raise, not a toast to them, but an acknowledgement of the ether, she pivoted seamlessly back to the director, voice steady as bedrock. Now about those slots, let's make them unbreakable. The room watched, suspense sacred, but Afiya stood serene, her poise a proclamation. You reveal your rot, I reveal my reign. Dinner unfolded in opulent layers, courses from a James Beard laureate fusing Senegalese jollif's spice with Harlem soul's depth. Plates artful as manifestos, rice pearled with plantains and lamb braised in palm wine. Afiya sat at the head table, encircled by board members and major donors, holding court with the ease of one born to thrones. Laughter rippled genuinely from her lips as she regaled them with tales of the collective's wins. 20 million funneled to youth poets turned screenwriters, but her peripheral caught it all. Julian and Bianca at a front table, close enough for visibility, far for deniability. Bianca's laughs tinkled forced, touches performative on his arm. Guests' gazes lingered on her artifice, then slid to Julian with pity-laced contempt. Parading a mistress at black excellence? Afiya mused, forking Yalif with deliberate calm, the spice blooming hot on her tongue like the rage she banked. Not ambition, arrogance. She knew the code, unwritten but iron. Affairs shadowed discreetly, but public profanation? It torched bridges in circles where legacies lingered longer than scandals. Donors, the real power, old money mingled with new minted, averted eyes when they approached, conversations restarting only after they passed. Julian played a generous benefactor, inflating HaleVision's pledge with a flourish, but Afiya saw the cracks. The way Alara Kingston's smile thinned, Jamal's brow furrowing in disdain veiled as distraction. The hurt lingered, a low hum beneath her composure, the public sting of sapphire on wrong skin. The private blade of his indifference twisting deeper with every forced giggle from Bianca's table. But it fueled her, transmuting to a quiet ferocity as dessert cleared. Sorbet spheres bursting with hibiscus tartness, a palate cleanser for the speech she'd penned pre-betrayal, now a scalpel in silk. The podium awaited at the hall's front, bathed in heritage amber from recessed lights she'd specified, warm as hearth fire, unyielding as truth. Afiya rose, spine a scepter forged in Bed-Stuy steel, the room's 400 faces turning like petals to sun. Her heart hammered, a war drum in her chest, fear of the lieks that might betray her, the words that might crack. But she ascended, microphone humming alive under her fingers, the weight familiar as a gavel. Beloveds, she began, voice clear and resonant, carrying the cadence of Brooklyn stoops and Columbia halls. We convene not for spectacle, but for sovereignty. For black narratives long silenced in Hollywood's vaults, now symphonies demanding stages that amplify, not appropriate. Pause. The chamber stilled, sacred suspense coiling tight. Julian fidgeted in her periphery, Bianca's gloss cracking under scrutiny's heat. Afiya's gaze swept the room, landing fleeting on him. Forensic, forensic. Then liberating to the donors, the directors, the dreamers. In years past, this collective has ignited 25 million in grants, birthing 50 films that redrew maps of who gets seen, who gets to claim the camera as crown, not cage. Her voice edged now, a strength that made spines straighten, lean forward. We've armed storytellers with tools to transcend tropes, to forge dominion not in the blaze that blinds for a moment, but in the forge that builds enduring. Not stealing spotlights to eclipse others for ego's fleeting eclipse, but scripting stars from the sidelines, elevating ensembles that outlast opportunists. Whispers wove toward his corner, a tide of knowing nods. Afiya pressed on, unyielding, her words a scalpel slicing silk. Dignity distilled, power purified into the void. Excellence endures when we leave lore unerasable, unowned by those who dim lights to make theirs brighter. Legacy? It's the light we kindle that can't be snuffed. Into that pause she poured her inferno. The raw throb of sapphire stolen, the bone-deep ache of vows vaporized, the fierce reclamation of a woman who'd stitched her sovereignty from scraps. Gratitude for co-creating this continuum. Thunder cracked, ovation organic, bodies rising in reverence raw, not polite claps, but a roar that shook the chandeliers. They hailed the oration, yes, the oracle more, Afiya, unbowed amid the barbs, her poise a thunderclap outshining sequins. Essence would dub it the manifesto of the moment by dawn. But in that swell, Afiya felt it visceral, not victory yet, but vindication's first breath, the room's pulse sinking to hers. She reclaimed her seat, pulse a defiant drum, facade fortress, Julian's gaze burning holes, Bianca's smile faltering. The night stretched, but her fire, it roared eternally. The ovation's roar ebbed like a retreating tide, leaving Afiya adrift in its wake, her skin prickling with the room's residual heat as she reclaimed her seat amid a flurry of clasped hands and fervent whispers. That was seismic, the nonprofit director breathed, her eyes glistening with the shared alchemy of words turned weapon. Afiya managed a nod, her throat tight with the echo of her own voice. Each syllable a shard of the sapphire's theft, flung outward without naming the wound. The pain pulsed steadily now, a deep bruise beneath her ribs, the triumph laced with the bitter aftertaste of isolation. Julian's table silent in the swell, Bianca's sequins dull under the light's forgiving fade. She sipped her water, cool against the fire in her chest, willing the composure to hold as dessert plates cleared. Hibiscus sorbets melting into ethereal pools, a fleeting sweetness before the night's true gauntlet. The auctioneer took the podium next, a silver-haired dynamo from Sotheby's, with a voice like polished gravel, his gavel a scepter promising chaos wrapped in charity. Ladies and gentlemen, beloveds of legacy, welcome to the live art drop, where vision meets vault, and every bid bursts a fellowship for the unseen. The crowd leaned in, electric with the ritual's thrill, programs rustling like leaves in a gathering storm. Afiya's table buzzed low, donors plotting alliances, directors eyeing grants. But her focus narrowed to the stage, where spotlights bloomed on the first lot. A kinetic sculpture of braided steel and LED veins, its form undulating like migration routes etched in light, evoking the Middle Passage's ghosts reclaimed as glory. Echoes of the crossing, the auctioneer intoned, by emerging visionary Tariq Ellis, proceeds to script incubators for diaspora youth. Bids flew swiftly, 20K, 50K, cresting at 120 Kimbe to a tech heiress whose paddle slashed the air like a vow. Applause rippled, genuine and warm, and Afiya felt a flicker of solace. These weren't just dollars. They were lifelines she'd laced into the evening's weave. The hologram series followed, a cascade of ethereal portraits, holographic vignettes of black matriarchs from Sojourner Truth's glare to Nina Simone's shadowed gaze, projected in luminous code that danced across the stage like digital ancestors, demanding reckoning. Veils of Valor by multimedia maven Zara Okonjo fetched 200K after a tense duel between two philanthropists, their rivalry a spectacle of one-upmanship that drew laughs from the floor. Afiya watched impassively, her fork tracing sorbet swirls on her plate, the cool melt mirroring the numbness creeping through her limbs. The room's energy built, a palpable hum, but her thoughts snagged on Julian, his profile rigid 2 tables over, Bianca's hand fluttering to his knee in feigned nonchalance. "Enjoy the show," she willed silently, the words venom sweet on her tongue. "Your intermission's ending." Then the pinnacle, her secret commission unveiled with a flourish of silk drapes parting like theater curtains. The multimedia installation loomed, a towering lattice of woven fiber optics and reclaimed wood, mapping matrilineal might from Sojourner Truth's unbowed stride to Solange Knowles' sonic rebellions. Lights pulsing in rhythms synced to heartbeats sampled from Harlem elders. "Threads of the unbroken," the auctioneer proclaimed, voice dropping reverent. "Commissioned exclusively for this evening by our visionary chair, Afiya Hale, a monument to the architects erased from history's frame." Gasps murmured through the hall, eyes swiveling to her. Afiya inclined her head, the gesture small but seismic, her heart clenching with the raw vulnerability of creation laid bare. This was her soul etched in light, threads drawn from Alara's sewing stories, woven with the clauses she'd inked to shield creators, a tribute to the women whose labor built empires without bylines. Pride warred with the ache, the sapphire's ghost at Bianca's throat, a counterpoint to this blaze. But she held steady, fingers laced under the table, nails biting crescents into palms to anchor the swell. Bidding ignited at 50K, voices leaping like flames, 75K from a gallery owner, 100K countered by a music exec. The room leaned forward, suspense a living thing, and Afiya felt Julian's gaze on her like a brand. Probing, perhaps, for the fracture her speech had veiled. 120K, then 150K, the auctioneer's cadence a hypnotic chant. Ladies and gentlemen, for the women who wove without credit, who do we say yes to tonight? Julian's paddle rose at 180K, thrust high with that billionaire bravado, his chin lifted as if reclaiming radiance stolen by her words. Whispers hissed, "Hale's making a play!" Afiya observed from her seat, impassive as marble, her face a serene mask while inside, contempt coiled tight, a serpent in her gut, hissing fool's gold for a fool's throne. He bid to impress, to overshadow, the gesture screaming, "See my generosity, my dominance," oblivious to the irony. Funding her artifact with her cause, wooing a whim with wealth she'd helped mint. The duel escalated, 200K from Alara Kingston, the publishing empress whose empire spanned from Ivy League presses to indie zines, her eyes locking with Afiya's across the tables in an alliance unspoken, a nod of, "We see you." Julian countered 250K, jaw set in siege, the hall hushing to a sacred suspense, sensing salvo beyond sums. Afiya's pulse thrummed, a wild cadence against her temples, the pain of his proximity a fresh laceration, Bianca's sequins winking like conspirators in his corner. 300K from Alara, her paddle a declaration. Julian surged to 350K, sweat beading his brow, the room's breath collective and held. Afiya met Alara's gaze then, imperceptible incline sealing it. Let him have the husk. The heart's mine. Alara lowered her paddle with a smile sharp as vindication, and Julian thrust again. 400K, the number booming like a gavel's premonition. Sold to Mr. Hale for 400,000. The auctioneer's mallet fell, triumphant, the hall erupting in applause laced with knowing chuckles, irony thick as the air. Julian's face etched triumph, chest puffing as he pulled Bianca close, her kiss on his cheek a performative seal. But Afiya mused inwardly, the thought a cool balm on her burning core. Bravo, darling. You've auctioned your arrogance for art I conceived, for a cause I consecrated, chasing validation from vapors that will fade by first light. The verdict's in, you're the cameo in my masterpiece. The contempt bloomed sweet, transmuting hurt to hollow amusement. The sapphire's theft diminished by this farce, his bid a Pyrrhic crown on his hubris. Twilight yielded to tango as the orchestra reclaimed the stage, waltzes weaving amid jazz riffs from a quartet of conservatory prodigies, their bows coaxing saxophones to sigh like lovers parted. Afiya lingered amid the swirl, laurels from every luminary draping her like a victor's cloak, directors clasping her hands with gratitude's fire, donors pressing cards laced with "let's collaborate" promises. She danced lightly, a turn with Jamal, his steps sure as his investments, laughter bubbling true as he spun her under the chandeliers. "You're luminous tonight, Afiya," he said, voice low amid the melody. "Whatever storm you're weathering, it only makes you shine brighter." She squeezed his arm, the words a lifeline against the undercurrent of ache. Julian's table emptying early, Bianca's arm looped tight in his as they ghosted toward the service stairs, dodging paparazzi flares with the stealth of scandals half buried. At 2:30, Afiya emerged onto Park Avenue, the autumn chill nipping sharply through her wrap, laced with the lament of wind-whipped leaves skittering like escaped secrets. The city's neon nebula stretched before her, a canvas of new beginnings fractured by sodium glow. Valets nodded deferentially as she slipped into the waiting Maybach, the door's seal a final exhale. Marcus glanced back. "Home, ma'am." She nodded, sinking into leather that cradled her like an old ally, the engine's purr a lullaby against the adrenaline's crash. Buoyant, yes. The night's dominion hers. The ovation's echo still thrumming in her veins like vindication's vein. But as the limo glided through empty avenues, past lofts where other empires slumbered, the levee broke. No sobs, not yet, just tears tracing silent paths down her cheeks, hot and unyielding, for the sister self who'd scaffolded his saga while sidelining her own scripts. Betrayal's bite wasn't vicious, it was vacuous. Julian's indifference a void deeper than cruelty, deeming her dispensable, a prop phased out for porcelain novelty. She permitted the purge in the privacy of motion, wiping her face with a trembling hand, the pearls cool against fevered skin. "You paraded her in my palace," she wept to the darkened window, Gotham's lights blurring into streaks of grief, as if my building meant nothing. The ache hollowed her, bone-deep exhaustion mingling with the night's hollow victory. Survived, yes, but scarred, the sapphire's ghost a chain around her heart. Marcus caught her eye in the mirror, silent concern etching his brow, but she waved it off with a watery smile. "Just a long night," she murmured, voice cracking on the edge. He nodded, wisdom in his silence, and the car pressed on, toward the penthouse that no longer felt like home. Grief was a guest tonight, not the governor. Afiya wouldn't drown, but in the quiet miles she let it wash, cleansing the wound for the war to come. The Maybach's purr softened to a hush as it nosed into the penthouse garage, the concrete ramp a descending spiral mirroring Afiya's thoughts, coiling tighter, ever inward, toward the confrontation she'd scripted in the quiet hours since the ball. She lingered in the back seat a beat longer than necessary, the leather's embrace of fleeting armor against the storm awaiting upstairs. Marcus killed the engine with a respectful click, his eyes meeting hers in the mirror once more. Silent query laced with the wisdom of a man who'd ferried too many fractured nights home. "Take the night, ma'am. I'll be here at dawn if needed." Afiya nodded, gratitude a warm flicker amid the chill, slipping a tip into his palm with a murmured "always." The door's seal broke the cocoon, and she stepped into the cool subterranean air, heels echoing like judgments on polished stone. The elevator ride was agony distilled, 30 floors ticking upward like a fuse burning thus slow, the mirrored walls reflecting her disheveled grace. Gown creased from the night's siege, hair a sleek cascade loosened by sweat and suppressed sobs, eyes rimmed red but resolute. Afiya leaned against the brass rail, breath shallow, the sapphire's phantom weight at her throat a chokehold. "Home," the word mocked as the doors parted to the foyer, its mid-century lines, clean teak consoles she'd sourced from a Harlem woodworker, abstract prints by rising black artists, now a mausoleum of memories. The penthouse lay dark, save for the kitchen's under-cabinet glow, a beacon drawing her like a moth to flame. She kicked off her heels at the threshold, toes sinking into the wool rug from a Senegalese weaver, each fiber a thread of the life unraveling. No sleep had come in the hours she'd stolen postball. Instead, she'd commandeered the study, kente-papered walls closing like a confessional, the ebony desk a slab for her munitions. Spreadsheets sprawled across its surface now, lit by the laptop's merciless blue. Columns of assets amalgamated in New York's equitable dance. Prenup precedents she'd insisted on at their vineyard vows. Intellectual property from co-authored treatments that bore Julian's name alone. Networks nurtured solo in boardrooms where her charm opened vaults he couldn't crack. Screenshots sequenced the scandal like a film reel of her undoing. The Paris selfie time-stamped over his meeting text. Venmo pings plotting Napa trysts like pins on a war map. Bianca's emails laced with insights that echoed Afiya's own strategies verbatim. And the crown jewel, her imprint on HaleVision's valuation, 500 million documented in emails embedding her edits into his epics. Intros igniting the IPO like Tinder struck by her spark. Clauses clawing equity for creators he'd cashed in on without a whisper of credit. Afiya's fingers traced the figures, Heart a hollow drum, the numbers cold comfort against the visceral void, the grief for a decade distilled to digits. This is what I built, she thought, tears pricking fresh, in what he'll fight to bury. Dawn's chorus filtered through the study skylight, Robin's tentative trills mocking the night's wreckage. As Julian materialized in the kitchen doorway, disheveled in boxers and a HaleVision tee, brewing espresso with the smug nonchalance of a man who danced unscathed. The machine's hiss filled the silence, steam rising like his ego, and he poured 2 mugs with a yawn. Epic turnout last night, he drawled, sliding one toward her across the island, scrolling trades on his phone. Bianca's undoubtedly the notification chime a knife twist. Afiya, ensconced in the Root's digital recap on her tablet, arched a brow, the article's headline blazing, Empire Ball shatters records at 10.2 million, Afiya Hale's manifesto ignites the night. We did, she agreed, voice velvet over vanadium, folding the screen with deliberate care. Donors buzzing for encores already, though encores in here. I'm stepping down from the collective, effective now. His mug clattered against quartz. Espresso sloshing dark as suspicion, eyes lifting sharp from the screen. What? Yeah, last night was flawless. The crowd loved the vibe. You owned it. Flawless, the echo edged her nerves raw, a laugh bubbling hysterical in her throat, suppressed to a cool exhale. She met his gaze, the blue she'd once drowned in, now a shallows of self-delusion. Flawless, she repeated, voice calm but carrying the blades keen. You ferried your fling to my forum, festooned in my forebear's finery, presuming I'd play polite while the room dissected us like a bad sequel. Discomfort flickered across his face, fleeting as a shadow, guilt's ghost, quickly banished by deflection. Bianca's on promo, synergy for the brand, HaleVision's reach. It was business, Af. Don't spin it dramatic. Dramatic. The word ignited the fuse, fury uncoiling from her core, like a serpent long coiled. Afiya rose, deliberate as a judge donning robes, setting her mug down with care that belied the quake in her chest, the raw, ripping hurt of his gaslight, 10 years' devotion dismissed as overreaction. Business, she riposted, reciting the litany from memory, voice steel wrapped in silk. Like the Paris meetings that dissolved into suites, the Toronto mixers that ended in silk sheets, or the panels you skipped, my panels, to pair her with agents I vetted. Julian's face molted from smug to menace, mug abandoned as he straightened, the island a battlefield between them. You're heated. We forged a fortress. Don't torch it over a tryst. 12 years, Afiya. That's worth more than this. Tryst. The diminutive stabbed, grief surging hot behind her eyes. Grief for the fortress she'd fortified alone. Her pro bono knights his ladder, her charm his keyring. Tears threatened, but Afiya channeled them to ice, her words a scalpel slice. Fortress? I fortified it. Your brand bloomed from my briefs, my brokers, my blueprints, uncompensated, uncredited. That's not opinion. It's reams of reality. She leaned in, voice dropping lethal. Emails embedding my edits in your epics, intros igniting your IPO, clauses clawing equity for creators you cashed in on while I cloaked as consort. His mask cracked then, eyes widening fractionally, recognition dawning like a noose tightening. Leverage, he hissed, stepping around the island, hand outstretched as if to bridge the chasm. Afiya, wait. Enlightenment, she corrected, sidestepping his grasp with the fluid grace of a woman who danced around pitfalls for a decade. Months of surveillance, your sojourns, her cameos, adultery ammo for alimony, my matrix for majority stake. New York's equitable, Julian. I've equity eternal. The words hung, a guillotine blade suspended, and he recoiled, the billionaire's bravado crumbling to a boyish plea. You're bluffing. We can talk this out rationally. 12 years aren't disposable for dalliance. Dalliance. Laughter escaped her then, low and lacerating, the sound echoing off Kente walls like judgment. She wheeled toward the gallery hallway, framed first looks of their fusion mocking from the walls. Sundance snow, vineyard vows. Pausing at the threshold, voice quiet but final as a gavel. You're correct. I cherished our chronicle. But you chronicled her chapters atop mine. Lies layered, liaisons lauded while I languished in lore. You discarded the decade, Julian. I'm decluttering the debris. He pursued, pleading desperately. Where to? Afiya, deliberate. Let's fix this. She turned in the bedroom doorway, the king-sized expanse a tomb of tangled sheets and shattered illusions, her eyes meeting his with weary clarity. The man she'd midwifed from dreamer to sultan now small, chasing youth's yawn over wisdom's wake. The mark, till a Morningside manner manifests. Let Bianca blueprint your breakdown. Packing was précis. Heirlooms her heart claimed, Ilara's embroidered linens, tomes of Toni Morrison dog-eared from late-night laments. Laptop laden with latent legacies. She left the Sapphire's echo, the HaleVision tease, anything carrying his cologne or conceit. At the portal, suitcase rolling like thunder, his parting shot landed limp. Regret this, you're discarding dynasty. Afiya halted, beholding the husk of her once vanguard. Not visionary, merely vain. The dynasty I discard, one of diminishment, where my melanin meant marginal, my merit mutable, my marriage a mask for your mediocrity. That's not dynasty, it's dirge. The door clicked shut behind her, the elevator's descent a free fall into freedom, tears flowing unchecked now in the mirrored cage. The marked suite awaited, skyline sonnet, serenity in slate and silk, but first the purge, sobs racking her frame, grief a deluge for the trailblazer tamed, ambition's archive for his arc, the Bed-Stuy blaze banked to bedside candle. Then ablutions in the lobby's marble bath, Amaro sipped slowly, and the call to Zara and Kosi, Manhattan's merciless matrimonial maestro, voice tempered steel over the line. Status? Initiate immediately, Afiya said, the words a key turning in her own lock. Filings forged. Your forensics? Faultless. Infidelity inflection, your imprint on his IP, will wrench a reckoning. 25 million baseline plus percentages. Swift severance, sans spectacle. Affirmative, his horde will howl, but hubris hinders them. Hurdles hone, Afiya affirmed, hanging up to perch at the suite's pane. Gotham's glow, a gospel. She'd scaffolded his saga, sans her, he'd stumble. Weeks wove into warfare. Depositions dissecting her dominion in sterile conference rooms, overlooking the East River. Julian's mouthpieces maligning her as ambitious adjunct with sneers that curdled her blood. But artifacts abounded. Affidavits from auteurs she'd amplified, their testimonials a chorus. Afiya inked the clauses that saved my film. Audits affirmed her authorship, allies attesting her as HaleVision's hidden hand, the judge's gavel falling equitable. 28 million, 15% equity, narrative nobility intact. Julian seethed, seeding scandals via tabloid tentacles, vengeful vixen versus visionary. But Afiya's arsenal was authentic. Op-eds in The Atlantic on the invisible ink of black wives in Hollywood, panels at AFI Fest unpacking partnership parody, her credibility a fortress unbreached. The tide turned. She, the savant spotlighted, not the spurned spouse. Pivot primed, Nia Patel's summons arrived mid-decree, a venture vanguard in content creation, her fun funneling fortunes to BIPOC narratives like rivers to sea. Watched your watershed, Nia noted over an encrypted call, voice warm as West African sun. Freed from fool's gold, you're primed for platinum. My studio syndicate seeks a Sherpa, strategic savant for scaling stories by sisters unseen. Afiya's aura ignited, autonomy absolute, a spark in the void of her hollowed heart. Dialogue danced 2 hours over Zoom's glow. Offer orbited, C-suite czar, 5 million salary, stake in syndicates scripting the future. By week's wick, Nia urged, but you're the cipher we crave. Covert competence, now coronation. Afiya acquiesced anon. Affirmative. The hotel haze lifted. Horizons hummed with possibilities hum. Months post-ball, Afiya anchored Patel-Hale Productions' flagship in Soho. Raw lofts with laser-cut lattice evoking adinkra symbols of wisdom. East River Elan, swapping ocean views for urban pulse. Vision viable? Nia queried, Afiya adrift in the void, already authoring auras amid exposed brick and beanbag clusters. Quintessential, she replied, meaning it. The space raw as her rebirth. Creative corners for POC pilots she'd greenlight without apology. Divorce dust settled savagely. Julian's minions mauled in motions that drag like open wounds, but metrics merciless. Her memos minted millions. Sans her, scripts stagnated in dev hell. Verdict, 30 million more, her halo unhewn, the judge's words ringing, contributions unequivocal, equity earned. He hurled headlines to tech blogs, painting her greedy, but hers harmonized in variety, from shadow script to spotlight sovereign. Ebony, Hollywood's hidden architects emerge. She symbolized the silenced scribes, spouses scripting sans bylines, black wives whose labor lit the marquee but never graced it. Patel-Hale pledged propulsion, pods for POC pilots, grants for Griots Global, Afiya's strategic eye-spotting sparks in the sidelines. Debut deck Tuesday, Naya noted one dawn, yanking her from reverie over oat milk lattes. A Lagos lens on cyber sorcery, snubbed by suits for her exotic edge, practitioner over pedigree. Afiya's grin gleamed, the first unshadowed in months. Precisely. Let's rewrite their blind spots. Relocation sealed the severance. A Tribeca triplex, compact chaos of Basquiat prints screaming rebellion and Benin brass glinting ancestral fire. She sculpted solitude supreme, books beckoning unbound from floor-to-ceiling shelves, brunches with beloved's birthing blueprints anew. No more king beds for two, hers is a queen's nest, sheets chosen for their silk against solo skin, the space hers without compromise. Professionally, propulsion ignited. First fund flooded with financiers flocking to her foresight. Inaugural infusion into the Lagos AI fable ballooning to 40 million valuation in half a heartbeat. Afiya jetted to SXSW's dusty tents, Berlinale's snow-swept screens, Busan's humid halls, befriending bards birthing biopics of forgotten blues queens, EdTech epics for Southside scholars, eco-fables scripted by Gulf Coast griots, media magnetized, town and country tribute profiling her as melanin mogul, TEDx slots unpacking the fine print of female fury in film. She handled it with a grace that had eclipsed the ball's barb. Ownership now, power proprietary, no longer borrowed from a husband's halo. As Afiya's flame endures, what empires would you reclaim from betrayal's ashes? Share your thoughts below. Your stories fuel the fire. Thank you for journeying with her. Until next tale, keep shining unbowed. See you soon.